go, God damn, if I can't trust a fucking New York Times to get it right, like you're supposed to be the paper of note.
But a lot has changed, though. So Zelensky, the president, he got into office with 70% approval, and before the war he had less than 30% approval. There's factions, there's divisions. The west side of Ukraine is pro, let's say, Ukrainian, and then the right side is pro-Russia.
So he got into office and he had a high approval rating, and then before the war it dropped very low?
Yeah, it had been dropping gradually over because of the division, because of the factions. He wasn't able to bring the country together. And the war, turns out his great leadership was catalyzed, was made possible. Like, he was sometimes sort of a catastrophe brings out the best in us, and that was the case with him. So
George W. Bush.
Yeah,
that's exactly what happened post 9/11.
Yes, exactly. But in his case, he wasn't able to hold that for a long time. Let's see what Zelensky does. But at the moment, Zelensky united a previously divided country, which is very difficult to do. So that's a historic event for Ukraine in its sovereign history. And so in terms of corruption, that might be a really big blow to corruption, that kind of unification. So I think there's a fundamental difference between the corruption in Ukraine and the corruption in Russia.
What is the conflict in Ukraine? Beside Russia, what is the internal conflict? Like the factions. What do they want? What is the dispute?
Well, no, it's just factions that are vying for power. That's just at the basic level.
So it's basically like right versus left in America.
Yeah, but okay, so there's a bunch of differences in what they stand for, what they're looking for. A lot of it in the recent years has been centered around the war with Russia, starting with 2014. And so some parts are Ukrainian-speaking, pro-Ukraine. Some parts are Russian-speaking, or primarily Russian-speaking and pro-Russia. So in the east, you have the Donbas region, but around that as well, they want to be closer to Russia. And the west part wants to be closer to Europe, closer to NATO, closer to the European Union. That's one of the divisions. You want to be pro-democracy, or you want to be pro-whatever the heck Russia is. Yeah. So it's like, are you pulling towards the west, the Western civilization, or are you pulling towards the east? The way of Russia, the way of China, the way of those superpowers.
And I'm sure they're influenced, and they have the ones who are pro-Russia. They're getting some signals from Putin, or meeting with him, and he's giving them indications that they would best be served to be aligned with him and be better for them. And
yeah, but he is still popular. He is still. I don't know exactly why he's popular, but there's a longing, there is in a lot of nations, to be the greatest nation on earth.
Isn't there always just a longing for a strong man, like the strong man leader?
I would say a strong vision, and that sometimes can coincide, or often does, with a strong man.
Isn't it like a natural inclination that people have to be led by a strong man? Like Putin, like him or hate him, think he's evil. That's all good, but there's no doubt that he's strong. He's a strong leader. I mean, he's been running Russia for a long time, and in the way he's been doing that, sort of unopposed, in a ruthless manner, is very impressive. It's evil, but in terms of its efficacy, it's impressive what he's been able to do.
I think strength is one of the things we admire in leaders, but it's not the entirety of it.
No.
So that's why Zelensky is extremely popular. He stepped up. The famous thing, Biden offered him a ride, and he said, "Fuck that, I'm staying put. Give me more bullets." And he stayed in Kiev, and held his ground where most leaders would have fled. This is the failure we had in Afghanistan, where we fled. Here's a leader that stepped up and held his ground, and that's rare in this world, and we admire that kind of strength, yes. And the same could be said by the Russian people, the Indian people, the Chinese people that admire strength in Putin. But we also admire other values that make this country great, the United States of America, is this kind of respect for human freedom, human rights, and sort of the embodiment of this ideal of like all men are created equal. That's not exactly communicated very clearly by Vladimir Putin.
Right.
That's but there's also a difference between, and this again, the Oliver Stone perspective is between the messaging and the actual execution. Hitler's messaging was also very sort of beautiful sounding, right? What is he talking about? Sort of National Socialism, respect for workers,
right?
Like the downtrodden workers. Germany is a great nation that deserves to be respected among other nations, and it was not respected because of World War I. Okay, but like, are you also going to mention that you're going to murder and imprison and torture people, millions of people? You're not. You're not. And the same things with America. Not moral equivalence at all, obviously, but we talk a lot about freedom. But what does freedom actually look like? When we fight terrorism and evil in the world, what does that actually look like? Well, it turns out that it looks like you're bombing civilians, children, lose their fathers and mothers. Hundreds of thousands of civilians die when you're spreading freedom all over the world. So we have to be very careful sort of separating the messaging from the actions. And we have to, as Americans, make sure we live up to the ideal, and we don't always. And I think when you just paint the whole world as black and white, it's easy for us to say America good, China, Russia bad.
Yeah.
And instead of the full complexity of that, and that there's warmongers like that watch Ukraine now with the money that we're sending there, and they get excited because they can escalate. And if they escalate, they can get more and more money for manufacturing weapons to both sides, to all sides. And what if China enters with Taiwan? That tension, that military conflict. And there's nukes on the ready everywhere.